Hello there, people of the internet. I am here with a Rock Island Armory 1911. I've had like 2 of these in my lifetime, this being my second one. Had to get rid of my first one. Times were falling, hard. So, the Rock Island Armory 1911, this right here is one that I hear a lot of controversy about. I hear people say that it's not worth anything at all because it is a dirt cheap budget 1911. And then I will have other people tell me that it is as good and up to par as some of your more higher end versions of the 1911. So we're going to go ahead and talk about whether or not this dirt cheap budget 1911 is going to be worth your money, and how much money is this handgun actually going to end up costing you. Before we get started with that, I'm sure you guys noticed that this is not my usual recording location. Just due to some recent events, my normal recording location is no longer available to me. If you'd like to help me get back out to a range, then down in the description below, I got a Patreon, and I also have a website where I got some merch, a couple of t-shirt designs that I got up, or you could do a one-time donation through the merch store, or you could like, subscribe, and share. I'm trying to get the numbers for this YouTube channel to rise, especially in the terms of subscription count. So, if you like this kind of stuff, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel because you are among the right crowd. So the 1911 is a firearms platform that was adopted by the United States in 1911 and replaced in the 1980s by the M9, which was a 9mm double stack handgun that replaced the single stack 45 ACP that was the 1911. Whenever the 1911 came out and was being developed, it was absolutely cutting edge technology. Not long before this was whenever the French had first invented smokeless gunpowder. It did not take people very long at all to start developing self-loading systems. Black powder just does not lend itself very well to self-loading systems because of the severe amount of fouling that black powder leaves on a gun, fouling and black powder residue. Well, smokeless powder doesn't leave that fouling and residue on the firearm, and so as a result, self-loading firearms started becoming really predominant towards the end of the 1800s. The design of the 1911 actually started in 1899, I believe, and there were several variations that led up to the actual design of the 1911. And this is actually a 1911 A1 model. There's a couple of increased safety features for it, but a 1911 is a 1911 as far as I'm concerned. And it was used by standard military forces in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea. It saw limited uses even after the adoption of the M9 Beretta, and it still sees limited uses to this day in the U.S. Armed Forces. I'm sure it sees uses in forces all around the world. It's a very popular competition gun because of its very comfortable, easy-to-use single-action trigger. So all this being said, the 1911 has very much proven itself to be a very incredible handgun. But is the Rock Island Armory 1911 worth the money that you spend? Well, let's have a look at a couple of the features. Well, now that we're done looking at the features, there's really not much features for this handgun. It's got standard military GI sights. It's got a standard single stack 8-round magazine that comes with the handgun itself. It does have the updated 1911 A1 beaver tail, so this particular one doesn't really give me hammer bite all that much. Besides that, this is just a standard 1911, standard spec 1911. The extractor is on the inside of the handgun. Everything about this 1911 is as generic as it gets. This is a I don't want to say bottom of the barrel 1911 because it's not. I'm not saying that whenever it comes to the quality of the gun. But I would call it a bottom of the barrel 1911 whenever it comes to the features of the gun. This is a basic 1911. All this thing does, goes home, pull the trigger, it goes bang, sends a 45 ACP downrange. We got ourselves not much in the way of controls. We got a safety, thumb safety here on the side as a 1911 would have. We got ourselves a slide release, and we got ourselves a magazine release, and magazine single stack standard 1911. So this right here is a handgun that will typically cost you around $400. I picked this one up for a little bit cheaper because I got it on the used market, but we're going to go ahead and gauge it at that $400 price point because that's about what it is that you see these run at. For $400 for a 1911, I would say yes, that's a good deal if the 1911 is actually worth anything. Well, I have had 2 Rock Island Armory 1911s, and I have stuck so much ammunition through these that whenever I do close-up on these handguns, people yell at me in my comments for having my handguns so dirty. I have had this particular 1911 so crusted with filth that whenever I would release the slide to go home, it would very slowly and gingerly, like, force its way forward through all the crap and debris that was in this thing. But it continued to function. Now, there are other cheaper companies out there. A lot of them are like foreign made and whatnot that make 1911s. And some of those 1911s are not all that great. The metal quality and the metallurgy is significantly less. I have had parts breakages with those 1911s from other countries, like, say, 1911s from Turkey. But I have never had a parts breakage from a Rock Island Armory 1911, and I have shoved a lot of ammunition through these. Like, more ammunition, the amount of ammunition that I've put through my Rock Island Armory 1911s is more ammunition, more money than I've spent on the actual handguns themselves. So now that I've finished talking them up, let's talk about a couple of downsides. The 1911, the Rock Island Armory 1911, is not nearly as bad as some people claim, simply because of the price point. People love to talk about how it's absolute flaming garbage and will never stack up to anything. But I make hits with this 1911 right here out to, I think my normal range was 40 or 50 yards, and I managed to hit my standard man-sized steel silhouette pretty regularly with that. But that does not mean that this 1911 is going to be as on par as some other much higher value, much higher grade 1911s. I could probably go browsing in my comments right now on my budget tier 1911 videos, and I would find several people talking about their budget 1911 and how it is just as good as the cutting edge, higher quality 1911s. And I'm going to tell you right now, no, absolutely not. The trigger, the actual physical trigger on this thing that interacts with your finger, absolutely sucks. I literally have my finger like slowly cut itself up on this particular one. Basically on all my, on both of my Rock Island Armory 1911s, just the trigger serrations are so freaking sharp on this thing. I don't like it, and you can call me a wimp if you want, but having a bloody finger and not liking it doesn't make me a wimp as far as I'm concerned. The actual trigger pull itself, this one right here tends to sit around 5 pounds or so. My last one was a little bit less, maybe 4 pounds, maybe a little bit more than that. But if you get yourself a custom-made, race-style 1911, that's going to end up having something along the lines of 1 to 1.5 pound trigger on it, that's going to be significantly nicer to shoot than something like this. The recoil spring on this thing is stiff and standard for a generic 1911. That's not something that you're going to find on a higher-end 1911. Whenever I pull this thing back, I can feel the the recesses on absolutely everything catching and rubbing on this 1911 as I pull this thing back. I can feel, as we go back, there's the disengagement of the locking lugs, sear engagement, hammer engagement, pull back beyond that, and we got ourselves our magazine catch. So there's a lot of things going on with this 1911, and none of that is what you would feel on a higher-end 1911. Just because they both send 45 ACP downrange does not make them equals. On your higher-end 1911s, oftentimes you're going to have better sights. I'm basically blind, and I can't see these sights for jack all whenever I'm standing in shade or something like that. I gotta be in the sun, and that's because these are generic military black sights, and they do not lend themselves well to long-range accuracy at all. But you get yourself a higher-end 1911 that maybe has some dotted sights or some... insert your choice of higher-end sights here. And those are just easier to make sight acquisitions with. You're going to end up being faster with it. You're going to end up being more accurate with it. Yes, you could use this, but no, it is not the equivalent of something that costs 5 times the cost of this right here. But even though this is not as good as something that would cost 5 times the amount of money, I'd say it's just as good as some of those 1911s that cost twice the amount of money. I've compared this, physically this, to several other 1911s that were way out of my out of my price range. They belong to several buddies of mine. I know I had a Colt. I know I had a Remington. Both of those I checked out, and personally, I would take this over both of those. Back in the day, back whenever those 1911s were being made, those were both original 1911 A1 models. The fit and finish and whatnot on those 1911s made them jiggle around a bunch, and they just weren't very well set. Well, this 1911, that's firm. Like a lot of your lower end 1911s, you jiggle them around and you hear them clanking around and whatnot, just because of the lack of what would you call it? Lack of fitment. They're supposed to have a lot of tolerances with those 1911s because of mass manufacturing reasons, and it makes them easier to put together and easier to continue to run in fouled conditions, supposedly, etc., etc. Well, the Rock Island Armory 1911, there's no movement in that. That is awesome. So yeah, this is very, very, very well put together. I know in the Colt and the Remington that I was checking out, I grabbed the sliding, I could like wiggle it around on the top of the 1911, and that does not lend itself to being very good with accuracy or anything like that. Granted, these handguns were like 70, 80 years old at this point, but $400 for this, and those Remington Colt original 1911 A1s, those were running like $1,200 approximately. But you could get yourself a nice budget 1911, or you could get yourself not that great of an expensive 1911. A lot of that has to do more with collectability than it does the actual quality of the firearm itself. But I would say, as far as quality goes, yeah, this right here stacks up to some of your much better quality handguns. But there's a severe line in the sand as to how far this 1911 will stack up. If we're talking just standard-based GI model 1911s, go out and get yourself one from Springfield or something like that. It's going to be more expensive than the Rock Island Armory. Yeah, that Springfield is going to be probably nicer, probably going to have a nicer finish on it, maybe some better hardening of the steel and whatnot, but I'd say this one right here is still going to be comparable. All in all, for that $400 price point, this right here is worth it. Like 110% worth it as far as I'm concerned. There's a reason why I've bought more than one of these Rock Island Armory 1911s in my time. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you guys on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.